which I don't have a nail to stick down through those, but...
Right, go ahead.
Okay, this is a quilting frame that the older people used before sewing machines came out to do that with. And the way they would do it was these planks would have holes drilled in it, and they would make it for the size of the quilt that they were going to make. And they would lay the which could be like a flat sheet now, on that and tack it down all the way around. And then they would put the batting on it and then put their quilt tops. And they would take straight pins and fasten it together like that. And when they started quilting, well, first of all, this would be hanging from the ceiling. And when they quilted in the daytime and got ready to put it up at night, they would take and just roll it up to get it up above their head so they could walk under it. And the reason these holes are here is when they quilted as far as they could reach, then they would take the nails out that held the corners together, and they would roll it up until they got to where they had quilted already, and then they put their nails back in these holes to hold it tight. And then when they quilted all the way across, then they would take the nails out, and they would continue rolling it on up. And depending on the number of people that were working on the quilt, they could have one or two sitting on this side and one or two sitting on the other side to get the quilt finished. So then when they got the quilt finished quilting it, then they would take it loose from the frames, and then they would have to
hand
stitch the edges of it around to make the hem of it, called hemming the quilt. So, and then we can show some quilts from back when. Okay.
3, all right.
Okay, this old quilt, I have no idea how old it is or who actually made it, but the back side of it has been 4 pieces of square material that has been pieced together. You can kind of see the seam right through here where it's just been put together to make, enough for the back side. And then front side is just squares that have been stitched together out of odd materials, and that has made the quilt top. That is the top that's put on it. Okay, and this quilt I found, I have no earthly idea how old it is, but because of the shape and everything, it's got a lot of pieces of material that are really worn out on it, but it's just scrap material. Like if they were making dresses or shirts or anything like that, what was left, they cut up in pieces. Like you could get pieces of scrap material and whatever you could come up with. Now this is like a piece of paper, cardboard or something that a pattern would be made out of. And that's whatever material you had. If you could get that piece out of it, then you would cut it out. But if it wasn't big enough for that size you were working on, you save that material for a smaller pattern. But the old people just used whatever material they could get a hold of and stitched it together. Now this is, I guess you could call a string quilt, and it's a quilt top that never has been finished. But our mother stitched this together.
It was done on sewing machine.
She did this with a sewing machine instead of piecing it by hand. So, but it's just scrap material.
Okay.
Okay. The quilt that's laying on the floor here is probably our mom's favorite pattern that she put quilts together with, and it's called the 9 Diamonds. And you just stitch 9 squares together to smaller squares together to make a larger square, and then you stripped it together to put the pieces to make the quilt top. And here is another example of 9 diamonds. And it's just, this was such an easier pattern to do, and you just they made it out of scrap material too, which it depended on the size of the square that you wanted to put together as to how big it was. And the quilts were necessary, you know, because of the type of heat they had back then, and lots of times you'd have maybe 3 or 4 quilts on one bed to try and stay warm. And then they would do quilts to give to newlyweds, or, you know, different things like that. So, but that's about what I know about the quilting. So, and now,
You do have Mom's name on this one over here, showing she was the one that done it.
yeah, I had talked with my mother, and her nickname was Jack, and I put the paper on it to show that she was the one that made this quilt. So, but it's more or less kind of something that's in the past. Most people, you don't know of anybody that hand stitches the quilts anymore. They have these machines that sews them, and it's a lot easier. You know, this takes time. And when you set it the quilting frame, you had your needle and thread on the top, and then you had to hold your fingers under the bottom to make sure that the needle went all the way through, to make sure that the stitch was connecting it all together. And you would be guiding your stitches, and your fingers would get picked up. They'd be really sore, but it was worth it in the end. Okay?